I originally had this video filmed and done last night. But I ended up accidentally deleting said video when I was getting rid of my back recorded stuff from the other video I did before that, the most surprising list. So because of that, I have to record this video again. So you can definitely imagine I'm not in the best of mood. Not to mention tonight, I gotta film the hardest of these lists. So, apologies if I just kind of run through this one. I do have a whole script written out, but I don't really have much to say beyond my script. And I want to try to get this video done today so that tonight I can just focus on the one. Because boy, is tonight's video not going to be very fun. Now that the positive lists are over and done with, for the film side anyway, now we have to go to the other side of that fence and talk about some of the negative stuff. Not outright negative, because some of the movies on this list are actually pretty good, but they were just overall disappointing. And no, Indiana Jones 5 is not on this list. Deal with it. So, what's up? What's happening? What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Anime Season with for anything and everything animation, and welcome to year-end list season once again for the top 10 most disappointing movies of 2023. Here's my written script. The images and stuff will pop up as I talk. I hope you guys enjoy. Please keep in mind, not every film on this list is actually bad. In fact, only half of this list is actually bad. This is being judged by how much it disappointed me from the expectations I had set as I was going into it, not just the overall quality of the movie itself. So, for example, movies like Exorcist Believer, I had no expectations going into it, and after the first Exorcist, I kind of just gave up on there ever being another good one, even though the third one was decent. I'll give it that. Third one was okay. But 2 was bad, Dominion was bad, that other one was bad, this one was bad too, and I expected literally nothing out of it. I knew that another Exorcist film was going to be bad, and this one did not at all appease that expectation that it was bad. I'll talk about more on the worst list, but that's just an explanation for why it's not on the most disappointing list, because I had no expectation for it whatsoever. And the other movie you're probably expecting to be on this list, I already said is not going to be on this list, is Indiana Jones 5, The Dial of Destiny. And it's simply because of how much I freaking hated Crystal Skull that this was actually a much better conclusion than that piece of crap ever was. So, yeah, not to mention I'm not that big of an Indiana Jones fan. I only really enjoyed the first film and the third film, Last Crusade. I did not enjoy Temple of Doom, and I freaking hated Crystal Skull. So, Dial of Destiny was another solid enough one. I was nice to it. I can understand some people not liking it if they're bigger fans of the series, but for me, it delivered everything it needed to. And one other movie you're probably expecting to be on this list is not going to be on this list because I'm one of the people that actually likes it, is Expendables 4. Because I actually really enjoy Expendables 4. And no, it's not just because I'm friends with a certain film critic named David Stewart Abrams who got to be a part of the movie, which, yes, I'm a little bit salty over. But it was cool he got to be a part of the movie, and I'm glad he had that experience. And as I told him in a messenger chat that him and I had after I watched this movie, I was like, where's the hate for this movie coming from? It's not that bad. Does it have some problems? Sure, but it doesn't deserve to be bashed as like one of the worst movies of the year, if not the worst movie of the year. Like, come on, guys. There's far worse things. So, getting those out of the way, because I know I'm going to get asked about them in the comments section, they're not on the list. Here are the ones that are on the list I hope you enjoy. Number 10 is Barbie. Yes, expectations were pretty low to begin with, but since the early reviews were surprisingly pretty positive, I had hoped it was at the very least passable and decent. And that was my mistake, because while this one was terrible, and I'm even more angry that it tricked me like this, I'll save my big final rant for the worst list, because trust me, I have a lot of things to say about this piece of crap to finally put the final nail in its coffin so I never have to talk bad again after tonight's video. Sorry, this movie just pisses me off. But I'll just say this. I do not hate the movie because it's about female empowerment or predominantly focused on a female character. Heck, in the same year, I reviewed the excellent 2009 Wonder Woman movie and the really good DCEU Wonder Woman movie. Not 1984, that thing is garbage, but I mean like the first one. Overrated, yes, but I found it pretty good, and I love the 2007 movie. I had a great time watching that when I did DC Live, so don't mistake me for a hater. And don't call me sexist either, because that couldn't be further from the truth. No. I hate this movie because its execution came off as obnoxiously preachy and not at all inspiring. Like, at all. Oh, and the music was bad too. Arguably one of the worst albums of the entire year that I've ever had to suffer through. Yeah, that's number 10, that's Barbie. I shouldn't have expected anything, but the reviews tricked me into actually hoping it would be good, but it's not. It's a piece of crap, and I'm gonna give it a good final thrashing in the worst list. Number 9 is Migration. Speaking of movies that tricked me, this one had the complete opposite problem. I went in with very average expectations because I've sat through so many of these below average to painfully average Illumination movies. And for the first 40 minutes, I was having a surprisingly great time. I was laughing at the jokes, staring in awe at its darker, more adult edge that the trailers didn't even hint at in the slightest, really enjoying the characters, getting invested in the story, and smiling pretty brightly pretty much all the way through the movie. And then, as I said in my review, the final 30 minutes happened and completely crapped over all that built-up goodwill with one of the most contrived, derivative, forced, unnecessary, and most awful final acts that I have seen in a movie all year. Yes, the movie itself is still very good, which keeps it from going any lower on this list. But it could have been great had they just had the balls to go all the way instead of backpedaling at the finish line. Plain and simply, just frustrating. Number 8, The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Another one that's not a bad movie, even though I did say, I believe in my review that it's a one-and-done movie, 6 out of 10. But just so disappointing that it can't escape this list. A movie about the journey of Dracula from Transylvania to England with a slasher-like structure of killing off the crew members one by one until the ship reaches that ultimate destination sounds like an incredibly fun time and a very unique premise for a vampire movie. But unfortunately, the writing was bad and pretty much completely sunk the project on its own. There's some great performances in here from some of the crew members because there is some legit really good acting in here. Similar to another disappointing movie that's on this list. But they made the story unbelievably boring, and Dracula himself is just a mindless monster with no dialogue or exploration of his deep, complex character whatsoever. Then add in the unimpressive kills that are mostly off-screen and the horrible CGI, and you have a disappointingly average vampire movie that could have been so much more had the person that actually wrote the movie given a damn. So, yep, it's on the list. It's not a bad movie, which is why it's not on the worst list, but man, was it disappointing. Especially considering this came out the same year as Renfield. Think about that. So, yep, that's number 8. Moving on. Number 7, Killers of the Flower Moon. One of the most boring movies I've ever sat through and undeniably one of the year's biggest letdowns. I mean, I like Leonardo DiCaprio, even if he's a little bit overrated in my personal opinion. And I like Martin Scorsese as a director. He's made some really good movies. I mean, heck, I think it was, 2 years ago, he made The Irishman, that one movie that was on Netflix that I really enjoyed. And this one was supposed to also go to Netflix, but then it ended up getting such a positive buzz around it that it became a theater release. And naturally, I was pretty excited, not to mention, it's a Western. I usually am a sucker for Western movies because of how rare they are nowadays. But this one was a pain in the ass to sit through. It was 3 hours just for the sake of being 3 hours. The story was cluttered and confusing. The acting was unimpressive and felt very generic, like everyone was just going through the motions. The story was bland, and the music is forgettable. Yes, it's competently made, which is why it's not higher on the list, but my goodness, was it a disappointment. I'm probably one of the only critics online to give it such a low score, but you know what? It deserves it. It is one of the most overrated, boring, Oscar bait crap piles I have seen in a long time. It may not be a bad movie, but it is definitely a very disappointing one. I appreciate your opinion if you disagree, but man, this movie is a drag. 6 is The Flash. While Flash isn't really one of my personal favorite superheroes, I was still pretty open to him getting his own film, even before all the controversy with Ezra Miller and etc., etc., etc. And my favorite Batman of all time, Michael Keaton, returning to his iconic role also had me pretty excited about it. And it was also going to be the movie that was both kind of the penultimate chapter of the Snyderverse while also being kind of a reset starter for the new James Gunn DC universe, but it wasn't that at all because of the constant troubles that happened behind the scenes, not only with Ezra Miller being a horrible human being, but also because it had to be reshot so many times, it had to go through so many different production issues, it kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed, and it just looked like the movie was just doomed to fail, like, not only because it was one of the year's biggest bombs, which, thank goodness, because this movie sucks, but it could have been something so cool. I mean, just so much wasted potential. But by the time I finally got to see it, I was only left with 3 specific emotions by the time I finished it. Betrayal, anger, and frustration. This entire movie is a complete and utter mess with terrible acting, horrible writing, some of the most abysmal CGI I've ever seen in my life. All the jokes were cringe and none of them were funny. The ending was insulting, the story was cluttered and incoherent and made no sense whatsoever, and is nowhere near the level of excellence of Flashpoint Paradox. And the pacing, despite being a story about the fastest man alive, moves at the pace of a slug across the backyard. And every single returning actor in this movie besides Ben Affleck completely phones in their performance with little to no actual passion or investment whatsoever. Michael Keaton especially. Most of this movie, it felt like he was just sleepwalking through his entire performance. And considering he is arguably the most iconic live-action Batman of all time, that is inexcusable. Yes, Michael Keaton has not been in some great movies, yes, but that doesn't mean that he has an excuse to just phone it in. Because he was one of the biggest reasons why any of us, myself included, wanted to watch this piece of shit. Because he is, in my opinion, the definitive live-action Batman. And having him come back, bringing back the classic suit, it could have all been great. Instead, it was just blatant, shitty nostalgia bait. And yeah, that's the portrayal I'm talking about. I expected at least Michael Keaton to be great, but not even he sounded like he cared about this movie in the slightest. And the director, Andy Muschietti, one of the Muschietti siblings that made the fantastic It Chapter 1, made this? Are you kidding me? Just a corporate soulish cash-grabbing asinine trash fire that only showed how garbage this DCEU truly was. Shazam and Blue Beetle were the only great movies in this entire universe. The rest were either just good enough to be, decently enjoyable without the connection stuff, like the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League, or Wonder Woman, or Suicide Squad 2016. Yes, I'm one of those people that enjoys that movie. Shut up. I'm allowed to my opinion. And even the ultimate cut of Batman vs. Superman had some interesting, cool stuff in it. But most of it, as in the rest of it, was so unbelievably horrendous that it made most of the worst of the MCU look like Avengers Endgame in comparison. Dude, I kid you not, That is no hyperbole. Just screw all of this. And I'm not even done ranting about it because it's going to be on the worst list. I'm going to move on before I pop a blood vessel. Let's move on. Moving into the top 5. Number 5. Most disappointing list, not the worst list, keep that in mind. Saw X. Yes, this is going to be a controversial one, and let me make this clear. This is a good movie. It is a very good movie and easily among the better of the Saw films, even from someone who's not the biggest fan of this series, if you saw my whole Sawtember review series, where I thought most of these films were okay, and then there were some really bad ones thrown in there. So, yeah, make of that what you will. But compared to the overwhelming high praise from the general consensus, especially some people I really respect, like 3C Films and Cody Leach and Sean Chandler, I felt like I was just straight up conned or lied to when I finally saw the movie for myself, because I did not see the movie that they saw, the 8 or 9 out of 10 movie. Tobin Bell is still great, yes. The kills are brutal, yes. The effects, which are mostly practical, are great, yes. The story is fantastic, for the most part, yes. And the pacing was solid, yes. All those positives are still here and accounted for and deserve recognition. But then on the other side of that fence, you have the cluttered, confusing third act that tries to do way too much at once and doesn't have the time to actually fully explore that decision. Like the anticlimactic ending that made me almost want to quit the movie. I kid you not, it is one of the worst endings of the year. Amanda's horrible hair wig, like, even the people that like this movie can't deny that is a huge that is definitely a negative. It's not a huge negative, but it is a negative of the movie. Even the people that love this movie can't defend that thing. And some cliche slasher fodder characters with no depth whatsoever. I mean, some of them have depth, some of them have some kind of conflict, but other ones are just there to be put in traps. That's it. Still easily among the better Saw movies, but I expected so much more than what I ultimately got, and maybe that was my own screw-up. I don't know. But yeah, it deserves to be number 5 on the most disappointing list. It's a very good movie, so it's not going to be on the worst list, but man, I expected so much more than what I got. Number 4, more controversy, Cocaine Bear. A very stupid and painfully average bore that early reactions fooled me into thinking it could be very good, or at the very least, mindless, gory fun. Instead, I was just infuriated by it. It's not a bad movie. I even said in my review it was painfully average, but I mean, the people that overpraise this movie, giving it like 7s and 8s, I questioned them pretty adamantly, because by the time I saw this movie, I was bored. The movie was stupid for the sake of being stupid. The movie was freaking... what else did I say? It was painfully average for the sake of painfully average. Were the kills okay? Sure. Was some of the acting okay? Sure. But most of this movie, I was disinterested, I was rolling my eyes, and I honestly didn't care for most of it. Not even the gory kills could pull me in, man. This movie was so overrated, so obnoxious, and so up its own ass that I couldn't watch it again. And poor Ray Liotta, rest in peace, man. I'm sorry this movie had to be the last thing on your filmography. You deserved better than that. I respect you if you're one of the people that actually found this movie fun, but in my opinion, it was painfully average at best, and egregiously annoying at worst. So, yep. That's why it's on the list. That's why it's on the most disappointing list, and not on the worst list. But I'm still never watching it again. It is extremely overrated to an obnoxious degree. and I recommend that you skip it. It's not worth your time. That's it. That's all I'd say about Cocaine Bear. Enough said, moving on. Number 3 is Murder Mystery 2. After how surprisingly fun the first film turned out to be, I was pretty excited to see how the sequel was going to turn out. Heck, I even watched both of them back to back in the same day. But by the end of it, I was unbelievably angry. Every good aspect of the first film was completely thrown out the window, instead replaced by writing and acting so bafflingly abysmal and half-assed that it makes Jack and Jill look like Billy Madison in comparison. Hell, I'd rather watch 8 Crazy Nights again over this shit. And yes, again, that is no hyperbole. I would rather watch a movie about deers licking on a frozen man who's covered in shit than actually watch this piece of shit. Because at least with that, I mean, it can haunt my nightmares. This is just stupid for the sake of being stupid. And then, add on top of that, all the jokes suck. The story is insultingly bad. It tries to go bigger and better, but loses whatever good faith it had. And it has no passion put into it whatsoever. Just a complete disaster, and an obvious cash grab by Adam Sandler, and probably one of the worst years he's ever had, because Bat Mitzvah was also really bad, and as for Leo, stay tuned for the worst list when I give that piece of shit a good thrashing. But, yeah, Murder Mystery 2, I should have expected nothing, but after how surprisingly fun the first film was, despite its issues, I expected more. I expected better, and instead I got a cynical cash grab. Screw this movie, moving on. Number 2, speaking of movies I should have expected nothing out of, I ended up expecting too much out of, apparently. Monkey King. I know that I already made a 15-minute long review about why this movie sucks so hard. But somehow, I'm still not done talking about it, because not only is it among the most disappointing movies of the year, not only is it definitely going to be on the worst list, but then I have to talk about it again when I talk about the best and worst animated films. Like, jeez, how much more must I suffer through this piece of crap? Here's what I wrote in my script. Enjoy. A brand new animated movie based on the original Chinese story Journey to the West, aka the source material that literally led to the creation of the Dragon Ball franchise. Yes, Wukong was the inspiration for Son Goku. With a unique art style that kind of looked like stop motion, even though it wasn't. It was CGI, but it was very stylized CGI, which I respected. And a lot of very talented people in both its cast and its crew sounded like a great experience. But the final product we got was, for lack of a better term, instead of faithfully adapting the source material into a film, they instead commit the greatest sin of any book-based adaptation movie. Attempted modernization. And a terrible attempt at modernization at that. With some of the most horrendous dialogue and writing that I've arguably ever seen or subjected my ears to in an animated film. No joke. And you bet I will be giving it a full-on shredding in the worst list. To put it simply, this sick filth. And now, number 1. Monkey King is a worse movie than my number 1 most disappointing movie. I can say that with full certainty. But the one thing that I cannot and will not defend is when a movie says that it's going to be an actual faithful adaptation of the material that it's working off of. And then makes the exact same mistakes that they did the first attempt around. To the point where the only good version of this we have is the one with talking sock puppets. You guys should all know what it is by now. I gave it a pretty good ripping in my review, and even though it is going to be on the worst list, I'm just gonna copy and paste what I say here onto that video, because I honestly don't have much to say outside of what I have for this most disappointing list, and I can't really muster up the same rage that I am about to do for this spot on this most disappointing list. So, number 1, the most disappointing movie of the year. It may not be the worst, but it is easily the one that crushed my soul the most. Is Haunted Mansion. After being stuck with the Eddie Murphy movie for years as the only adaptation of this subject material, and a really bad adaptation at that, I rejoiced in delight when Disney announced that they'd finally be giving The Haunted Mansion a second attempt at an adaptation. Then add on paper the cast, mostly all sounding like great choices. You know, Rhys Stanfield, Owen Wilson, Danny DeVito, Jamie Lee Curtis. Like, that's a great cast right there. And the trailer also showing some promise, with horrifying imagery that really pushed the boundaries of its PG rating, and a set of very diverse characters having to work together to survive the spooks of the mansion itself. I mean, that all sounds really interesting and could actually work pretty well. It all sounded so good on paper. But in execution, it completely fails yet again. Yet again, it completely fails. Yes, the main protagonist is surprisingly fantastic, played by Rhys Stanfield, and delivers a great performance that absolutely deserves recognition. That is way too good for this piece of crap. And yes, some of the imagery is excellent and does a good job replicating the ghost of the original Disney World attraction. Yes. But literally everything else in this movie is garbage! Literally everything else in this movie is complete and total garbage. The rest of the characters are boring, or in the case of Tiffany Haddish's character in particular, downright annoying. The story is very haphazard and makes no sense. The pacing is an absolute mess. There's a ton of pointless filler. The runtime is egregiously long for no justifiable reason. And besides some of the imagery, it's not scary at all. The dialogue is eye-rolling. With so much product placement, it makes Sonic, look tame in comparison. The writing is complete trash and so cliche, and by the end of it, I was just enraged. Because this is the second time they've tried to adapt this material into a feature-length live-action film, the third time they've tried to adapt this material in general, and the second time they completely fucked it up. And the fact that this came out only 2 years after the excellent Muppet version, which was released in October of 2021 and is still by far the best adaptation of this attraction and of this material, just makes it even more baffling how much it fails. It may not be the worst film this year, but it's undeniably the most disappointing one. Never touch this material again, Disney, because you very clearly suck at it, you clearly don't know how to adapt it, you clearly miss the entire point of the actual material itself, and most of all, you clearly don't have a single clue what you're doing. Not to mention this was released the same year you made the really good Little Mermaid remake. Shame on you. And with that, as we reach the half-hour mark, we're done. That is the most disappointing movies of 2023. And I'd say it would get better from here, except it's not. Because next time, we have the final list to talk about with the movie side of things. And it is the hardest one that I have to do. We've talked about the best, we've talked about the most surprising, and we just finished talking about the most disappointing. So now we have to go to the drastic other side of the fence. With the absolute bottom of the barrel. And while I only had to give out 1-0 this year, I have watched a lot of trash. There was so many bad movies this year that I couldn't even do just a normal top 10 list. No, I had to extend it. And at first I thought, okay, then a top 15 worst list. And then I thought again, like, no, not even that can still do it justice. So you know what? It's going to be a top 20 list. The top 20 worst, most abominable, most unbelievably shitty movies of 2023. Buckle up, guys, because it's about to get very bleak. I'll see you tonight for that video. Until then, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And until that torture, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.